Go.
All right. Welcome again. I'm Joelle Mille. I'm a pediatric cardiologist, and my connection to New College is my son graduated from here a few years ago. And I moved back to Sarasota. I live about a mile away. And I told Michelle that I would be happy to help out in any way I can. I'm coming at this from a completely different angle that you guys. I was on the admissions committee for Virginia Tech School of Medicine for the first 4 years of the school. So I helped select the first 4 classes of the school. So I saw that side of it. It's been a couple years, maybe 5 years since I finished up there, but still know a lot about the what happens from the medical school side. So I thought I'd just come and talk to you guys, see what you want, try to answer questions, and that's me. Now here's Sophia and Laura and Daniel and Kelly and Jessica. Okay, good. Laura and Daniel were just asking questions about my profession. I'm a pediatric cardiologist. And since we last had this meeting last year, I don't see any return faces, which maybe means I bombed last year. I am working now. I don't know if you know that or not. I'm doing some general pediatrics for the health department. And I've been helping a little bit out at LECOM, but I'm not really sure I have too much time to do that. And I'm also looking at a position in pediatric cardiology south of here. So doing a lot of stuff, but mostly I'm retired. So I don't have any agenda. I just thought I would come and take questions and talk about the process. Now, Laura's a first year, Dan's a third year, and second year, and third year, and first year. Okay. So I put up this site. I had logged in for the AAMC, and for the first year, I know that the third years are on there because they had to sign up for the exam, but you might want to get on there and just kind of read more about it, and it looks like there's free material and stuff, but just look at the process of being pre-med, because I mean it's not just taking an exam and get good grades. It's really kind of a lifestyle thing, and then it continues once you're in medical school, residency and fellowship, and then working. So this is from VTC, Virginia Tech Carilion School of Medicine, and it just tells what the requisites are for this particular med school, which aren't so unusual. And this is probably what I can most talk to you about. This is the process that you're doing, meeting with the pre-med advising, and obviously knowing your classwork, and also what are the other things that the medical school is going to look for. When my son went to law school, all they wanted was his LSAT and an essay. That's all. They didn't want to interview him or anything. It was just like a grade was test. You know, what were your grades in college? You know, in medical school, there's a lot more. I mean, to get your foot in the door, you have to have the academics, and also the MCAT scores, really, to get your foot in the door. But then once you're in the door, there's a lot more that they consider. And so for VTC, this is what they look. There's medical volunteering. And basically what they want to see is that you're actually interested in medicine, so that you're shadowing or volunteering or transporting or whatever, the EMT or scribing. That's also community, and I would say probably community as well as campus volunteering, like what else you're doing, you know, what committees are you on, what, you know, you're the president of what, and you've done what and organized what. And as far as it's not just like I showed up for Habitat for Humanity one Saturday and I built a house, you know. I mean, it's more what we would look at, honestly, is like, well, how many, was it a continuing obligation? Was it like, big brothers, big sisters, that they have, a little kid that they mentored for 3 years, or were they always at the mission on Saturdays? I spent my Saturdays in the mission, we're sort of, I think that's important. Obviously, we see a lot of I did a cancer walk, I did this, but the medical school wants to see that you organize the cancer walk, or you organize your group to be in the cancer walk, or, when you were in the PreMed club, but you were the person that organized, and you actually were a leader. That's what they're looking for. Research. Not all medical schools are that hot about research. Our school requires it, and you can't graduate without having a publishable paper. You don't have to publish it, but you do have to go present someplace, preferably someplace fun. So with new college, I would think that you guys would be at a marked advantage because of the requirement for a thesis. It also may, for the first years, it may make you think about what you're doing over the summers. You really want to leverage your summers and your time off and your J terms and stuff like that, because that's something that's very important. And once you do the research and you want to try to get a poster out of it, then you have to go online and find some place that you might be able to get a poster and submit it, because people are always looking for posters, right? And just paper if you can, obviously. And then leadership and teamwork, I talked a little bit about that. They care who you are. One year we had all dancers. I don't know, it just sort of happened that way. Everybody was a dancer. But what your interests are, again, they're not just selecting your GPA or your academics like this in your MCAT score. They're looking about who you are. We had one who was a concert pianist, and I remember that pretty well. He was he performed in Carnegie Hall, so it was stuff. But not everybody is, not everybody is a musician or a dancer, but at least, what you do in your community and who you are, because you're not just, not somebody just who lives in a library. And if you are, you can be a lawyer. My son is a lawyer, so not to disparage lawyers. They're very important. But I think for medicine, most medical schools are looking for more holistic stuff. So, and what we used to do, honestly, is when we had a student, the committee was formed of physicians, but before a student actually got to the committee to be reviewed and got an invitation for an interview, there were people in there were secretarial people and actually people with a lot of expertise in schools that went through all these applications, and so they read the essays. They obviously looked at the scores. They looked at and if they thought that it was somebody we would be interested in, then they would offer them an interview. And once they were offered the interview and came to the interview and completed the interview, then one of us physicians would go through and take a really deep dive into their application, the whole double AMC application. And we would separate it like this, and write the pros down with this person. What did he do, or what did she do for medical volunteering? Well, when she was home in Orlando in the summer, she volunteered at a pediatric clinic, or she shadowed in the hospital, or whatever, and spent whatever. And then, again, the community volunteering, we would actually assign a grade to that, 1 through 5 or 1 through 3, for that. And then this separately, we would assign a grade for that. How much did they volunteer? Were they consistent, and did they just show up for cancer walks once a year? What did they do? And then research. The research was always, I always thought, was the toughest one. But obviously they looked at if you did research, and then if you gave posters, you'd probably bring you up to a 2 if it was, real research in a jury poster. And if you got a paper off, and that a lot of times would get you up to a 3. And like a 1 if you just did something, and then some people had 0s, but I don't think they got an invitation. So, and then leadership and teamwork. And this is a lot more nebulous. This is more, one of the things that meant a lot to to the head of admissions, the dean of admissions, was Eagle Scouting, from high school. Most everything high school and before that doesn't count, except for this one guy who's really into the Eagle Scout thing. But it's who you are again, and so that's a sort of softer score. And a lot of times it's sort of morphed into this campus volunteering thing. And then obviously we would look at the interview, and the interview was a very involved interview. It was a multi-mini interview MMI format, so you would have 9 interviewees for 5 minutes each or 7 minutes each, and then, I guess it was 10 minutes each. And then at the end, you would come and see me, from the admissions committee, and you'd have a 20-minute interview with me, and I'd talk to you about you. But the other one was just for every other person that interviewed, they'd pose a question. The question would be on the door. You'd read it, you'd think about it, and you'd go in and you'd talk about how you'd solve that problem. And a lot of the medical schools are doing that now. Well, one of the examples is you are about to fly to London on business, and you stop at your coworker's house to pick him up to catch this plane to London for business. And you find that he or she is besides themselves because they just feel like they can't get on the airplane because they're so afraid to fly. So what do you do? I mean, there's no right answer to this. That's one of the examples.
A lot of wrong answers.
Yeah, well, so if you would say, like my lawyer son would probably have said, that's their business. See you later. He would float off to London. So, but otherwise you would have, somebody would say, would sit them down and then would find out why they're worried, if they've flown before. We'd talk about, probably talk about how statistically they were safer on that flight than driving downtown, and that it's just really a loss of control. And it's your ability to really schmooze, honestly, is what and to relate and to show empathy. So that's one of the examples. And there are other examples too, but I can't remember which are the examples, and which are the examples that we actually use, which I can't talk about because if you interview there, you say, oh, I know this question. And there was one thing that there was a piece of paper that the interviewer had, and it was something about schools, I don't know, it was something about special schools and stuff, and whether you're pro or con for the school thing. And on one piece of paper, they had a graph showing that these schools, the charter schools, were better for this subset of students. And on the other side of the paper, there was a different graph that shows that they didn't work. And so the interview would say, I believe this, and this is why, and the interviewer would say, well, you're wrong, and show the graph that didn't apply. And just, again, what they were looking at is your ability to say you're wrong, or that, somebody disagrees with you. I mean, it's all that stuff. It's like a personality thing. Yeah, we had one kid that we nixed because he was mean to one of the people in charge of the admissions committee. She was one of the people in charge, and she wasn't a physician or anything, but she was at she was at the directions desk when you came in, and he was really nasty to her. That was easy.
Yeah.
So anyway, like things not to do when you're in an interview is like, yell at the boss's right-hand man. I mean, she really was one of the ones that was, instrumental. And, I mean, she was at every committee member and said, you know what he said to me? I mean, he had some other misadventures too, but
That's just a microcosm
of who he was, right? And so
the exam starts when you walk through that door.
exactly, and we basically want people who are nice to people, who are empathetic, and who can see two sides to the story. So, like, probably the best thing to say is like, I feel strongly both ways. Well, I can really kind of see both ways. This is because of my background how I would feel, but I can also see because we don't want people that just say, well, you're wrong.
Yeah.
You have to say, well, I can see it from your point of view, really. And a lot of medicine is like that. You kind of have to experience from the patients and their families' point of view. You have to.
It gets better outcome.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of studies that show that if, with like cultural sensitivity, especially if somebody identifies with that culture, they actually get better care. I mean, they take better care of themselves, and it's just because they relate better.
Especially like looking at textbook information versus the actual testimonials.
Yeah. So, a lot of the people would come in and they just do great on the interview. And some of the students that we took, I mean, their MCATs were kind of on the lower side, but, I mean, they did fine in school. I had all the students 3 years later when they came onto their clinical year, right? Because they would come in, there'd be 2 years, you do 2 years of basic science and some clinical stuff, and then you hit the wards. So that's when I had him as the clerkship director. I forgot to tell you, I was also in charge of the students that were rotating through pediatrics. That was my gig. And I couldn't remember. And so everybody that I had voted on and the admissions committee and gone through and read all this stuff. Couldn't remember any of that. And they would say, oh yeah, Dr. Miller, you interviewed me. I'm thinking, good to know. I would just sort of nod and say, yeah. And it's like, really bad at names and faces. Oh. And I'd sort of remember like the story, but I wouldn't remember. It was like 3 years ago. So at our medical school, when you rotate through pediatrics, we would have about 5 to 6 of our MD students, and then we'd have 2 DO students from the DO school in Blacksburg. And then we'd have 2 or sometimes 3 PA students. And I mentioned my son is a PA student at that school. And so we'd have 10 students, and I couldn't remember who anybody was, so I just would treat them all the same. And basically, the rules are pretty much identical.
As far as getting your foot in the door, you said you need, all right, on here it says GPA and MCAT are impact. We don't have a GPA here.
Yeah, you don't. And, I don't think that's a big deal. There's no GPA here either. They don't have grades here. So, and there's a lot of other schools that don't have GPAs, but what you really need to do is really have great comments and have, a really well thought out thesis and have taken challenging courses. And so it's really going to be, not if you got an A- or a B+, which is to your advantage. And unfortunately, it probably means that I would imagine that the MCAT's one is going to be more, because they're going to say, well, the MCAT is fine. And there's something, do you know how they word it when they write a letter about if you pass, it's at least a B, right? I mean, you wouldn't pass with a C. They wouldn't.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
The letter from the registrar explains that it's not, yes, basically,
Right.
yes, that it would be the equivalent to a B or an A.
Right.
It's very broad.
Right, and so you see that the GPA usually, so if you sat at all your courses, it's either a B or A, and if the average, is 3.5. And I've got to tell you, there's a lot of schools with grade inflation. Like in Virginia, an example, UVA, everybody gets A's. And William and Mary, very hard to get an A in organic chemistry, almost nearly impossible. They'll have like 310 people get A's. It's, and UVA, like pretty much if you do the work and study, you can pretty much get an A. So so of all the stuff, that probably is less important. And you look at places like Princeton, their scores are really lower. They don't have great inflation either. But they're going to Princeton. So, I think
it factors in that general passing is a C, but we are an honors college.
Yeah, I think there's a statement that says it's usually a B or above. That means it's over, your GPA is over 3. And honestly, if you went to community college and then transferred in, you'd probably have a much stronger GPA. And they also look at the science, they break it down and they look at the science GPA and the everything else GPA too. So, I just don't think it's that big of a problem as long as you have really strongly worded valuations that show that you're, a top-notch student and a good MCAT score. And the other thing I would say for an MCAT, like if I was going to do this, I did it the wrong way. But when I took general chemistry, I would go and study the MCAT for general chemistry. When I took organic, I would have like a little study group and look at the organic credit on the MCAT study book. That's how I would do it. And still, until as you go through college, as you're taking these courses, go back and practice the MCAT stuff. Make sure, because what you get taught is not necessarily the stuff on the MCAT. But you'll be familiar with it enough that you should be able to understand it. If you don't, you should figure it out.
Shortly before I started at New College, we did a little informal study of our students who had gotten into med school and who hadn't in recent years. And invariably, the ones who hadn't been able to get in had middling kind of MCAT scores. The ones who got in had good MCAT scores and strong letters of recommendation. So it was never a clear-cut case of, oh, we don't have grades, therefore they didn't get into med school. Their MCATs were not strong. So it's even though there's a little bit of an urban myth that it's hard to get into med school from here because we don't have grades, but that's not necessarily the case. The folks who didn't get in didn't necessarily understand that what they did have wasn't strong enough.
And the other thing, I think it's a culture of really supporting yourselves as far as pre-med. And I told this to the medical students too, because remember they're going to be competing for residency, right? And you're much stronger as a group than you are individually. So you're much, especially for this. You're not really competing with each other, honestly. You're competing with the rest of the country. And together you're stronger finding out, what you don't know, and helping each other. You learn from teaching somebody, and you also learn what you don't know. And I think the pre-med committee, I think that's partially part of it. Is I saw some schools from an admissions committee member, like one of the schools, Washington and Lee, they had a huge rate of acceptance. It wasn't, it's not as, it's a good school, it's not a great school, but they were really on it as far as pre-med stuff. It was really important to them, and the students, there was a whole culture about how we got to do this. We have to do it together. You just can't. It's a lot harder you can do it as an individual, but it's easier together. And especially since you get credit from the school you want to get into for doing it that way. Because we know that once you get to med school, we need you to be behaving that way.
How important when applying to medical school is like your undergraduate, like where you go for your undergraduate?
I don't think it's all that important. I don't. I think probably the MCAT score is more important.
How about your area of concentration?
Yeah. As long as you hit all the requirements, doesn't matter. I mean, they kind of like it if it's something else.
So let's say your AOC is not side.
That's
but
great.
you take math side.
As long as you get all the prerequisites. It's actually harder if your major is not within the science because you got to do all these prereqs, plus you got to do your major. So that's actually, I mean, we would look at it, I would look at that as a plus.
A shout out to you.
Yeah. I looked at this one, I remember this one student, he was a Spanish major, and he was from Duke. And I don't know if he might have come to, actually he might have been one of our students. But, so he went down to Argentina to write his thesis or whatever and teach at the school. When he was in Argentina, he did all his medical volunteering, in Spanish in Argentina. And his pre-med advisor wrote, well, I don't know why he chose to do it in Argentina instead of at Duke. I'm like, because he's a Spanish major. Just like, God. And he's paying $50,000 a year for you, I mean, I just remember thinking, we just laughed and we just went, can you believe that a pre-med advisor wrote that about one of their own students? I felt like calling up his mother, It was crazy. But that would have never happened at Washington and Lee, That would have never happened there. So it's just, but that was a plus for him. And I think that, I can't remember if we accepted him or not. I think we know who it is. But that to us was a huge plus. And we just didn't listen to his previous.
It's generally case by case, but do a lot of institutions place like an understanding of more rigor to American institutions compared to other?
To American, they're only going to accept people who are American or Canadian citizens. So if you go overseas to do a semester, that's fine, that's great, that's wonderful. But they're not like going to be accepting anybody from Russia or China or whatever. You have to have like a class whatever visa.
So it's generally a good thing if you were to study on like the study abroad programs offered here?
Well, I think it gives you more depth, as long as it's something that, as long as it's relevant, or relevant to your major. And if you can speak another language, that's great, particularly if it's Spanish. Let me tell you, Spanish is really, other languages are too. Spanish is really super important. I wish I'd taken more Spanish. So, what?
Wish I retained more of what
Yeah,
I
well,
learned about
if you try, it's okay. Yeah, you just have to try.
It'll keep you like beginner.
Yeah.
They'll learn.
But if you're in a different country studying and you speak fluent French, that's good too. Especially if you go down to Haiti, they need French speakers down in Haiti. And down in Miami because of all the Haitians. We had a terrible time. I did my residency there, and the intern with a high school French was like the most popular intern. It's like, Jonathan, can you talk to this woman, please? We had one Creole interpreter for the hospital, and it wasn't pretty, but he could communicate.
Sometimes just like understanding is more.
Right. I don't speak Spanish very well, and I'm working in a clinic where I speak a lot of Spanish, and the interpreter will say, "Oh, you do such a nice job." I'm thinking, not really, but thank you anyway. But the patients like it.
Yeah.
You know, even though there's an interpreter, if I'm like floundering around in their language, they seem to relate better to me. And to reward me, they'll speak in my language. So here I am, I'm communicating poorly in their language, and they're communicating poorly in my language with an interpreter standing there. But but it is what happens. Is anybody here fluent in Spanish? Portuguese, now that's great. You know, we have a lot of Portuguese patients at the health department in downtown Sarasota. Yeah, we do, and like, we have to use a language line because nobody speaks Portuguese. Yeah, so, no, seriously, if you volunteer for the health department, that's huge because there's a lot of Spanish speakers, but there's not a lot of Portuguese speakers. Or, yeah. At least everybody speak Vietnamese, that's like the big one too. I have a lot of Vietnamese immigrants in Sarasota.
So, I see philosophy. I hear a lot about like philosophy being somewhat important, and is that just like mostly for ethics?
Philosophy, is it on here?
I don't.
Yeah, for English. I think
Yeah.
it's just because, like, you know, philosophy.
I think what they're doing is they just want to make sure you can write. Yeah, and reason and write. Yeah. And I know that you guys don't have to take English. And there's also a letter that comes out and says, this is a writing school, everything is written, and we don't do freshman English because by writing these papers, they have to be able to write on that. So there is some sort of verbiage that comes out that they say that, if people haven't taken English.
I thought you still needed to take at least a English one.
For med school?
Yeah.
No, just for
liberal
Oh, you
arts.
do?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Some people opt out of it because if you like
Oh, okay.
score a certain.
On your.
Well, you might as well do it because you need it for, you do need it for med school, so you might as well do it.
Because that's what Dr. Wilson.
Well, I think
We'll
most
be
people at the
discussing
school
that in the
usually
workshop on
end up
Tuesday.
always
Okay.
taking some
Take
English
more
class.
Yeah.
Wallstrom?
Well,
No.
Dr. Wallstrom is extremely busy right now. She doesn't usually take people on it, and I was a big exception because I came in with my advisee retiring and
Yeah.
everyone else. So
And Dr. Oben is going to be on sabbatical. Wow.
that Wallstrom. If it's a sabbatical Wallstrom.
Will there come a point in the med school application process where you'll be asked to put in grades or GPAs and you'll sort of have to decide what to put? Is that something that comes up, you know, on the online applications?
Yeah, it is. I think what you have to do is like copy and paste.
Copy and paste what?
Because we don't have.
I don't know, so I don't know how technically it's, that would be a double AMC, because
Okay.
it would be a double AMC, and that would be a good question to ask the double AMC, because New College is not the only college that does it.
Right.
I've been told by people who have graduated that they didn't put down anything, and they also didn't select NA, and all that came up was a pop-up that some windows were unfilled, and they just continued and then submitted the letter that the registrar provides of we do not have grades, we do not have a
Yeah.
GPA, this is what's.
But it would be, you know, Michelle, it would be probably worth a chat with somebody there about the application.
All right, I'll
Like
make,
what, yeah.
I'll make a call.
Yeah.
And that sounds like it could be an option, but yeah, I'll make a call.
Yeah, and see what they recommend.
Okay.
Because it's not just, I mean, Brown doesn't have grades either.
Right.
To some extent, they do have grades.
They do have grades, and they you can opt to not have a grade, but it's seldom done.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
like for a
for
class.
class, yeah.
This is just like, it's
Do medical schools like use like a filtered search for some students that have a particular range of GPAs that they reach out to?
No, what would happen for New College, it'd be like, got a good MCAT score and everything else is great, there's no grades because they don't have grades in their school. And it really probably would be school dependent. But like I said, I don't think it's a big deal, especially, it's more like they've gotten new college students before, they know they're good students, but for the Florida schools. And then for schools outside, it's just more the school's policy. But VTC doesn't have school reviews. We don't have grades. And some of the residency programs complain about that. They're like, well, we don't want grades. I mean, especially in clinical. I mean, especially for clinical years, it's just so arbitrary. It would be incredibly arbitrary. I mean, you think, because what is a grade, like I said, William & Mary and UVA for organic chemistry, and A in UVA might be a C at William & Mary, because they're different schools. I mean, and who, has done any scientific, I'm getting taped for this. I'm probably going to get, I love UVA, but I really do, and I think it's a great school, and I have a lot of friends there, and but I think they have some great inflation from what we saw.
Is it entirely advantageous to apply immediately to medical school rather than trying to get into a graduate school for a master's program?
I think if you're a strong student and have a good thesis and you have good MCAT scores, I don't think so. And that's the other thing. If you're not successful the first time, what do you do? It depends on how strong your MCAT scores are. But there are alternatives to MD schools, and one is DO schools, which, the MCAT scores are usually a little lower, though they're still excellent students. And let me tell you, I had DO school students and MD students, and I had great DO students, and a lot of my colleagues are DOs. So I think that's a very good option. There's a little bit,
Sorry, what's DO?
It's a doctor of osteopathy. The schools are bigger. There's LECOM, I think, I forget how many, in Bradenton. And our school has 42 students, and I think LECOM has a couple hundred.
Do they go through more schooling?
No, it's 4 years, it's the same thing, except for the osteopathy. It was they do more holistic manipulation kind of stuff. I'm not a DO, so I don't know about it, but their attention to basic science and clinical science is just as rigorous. The schools are bigger, and really the biggest problem is that when you get to your clinical years, for example, at VTC, you're going to be, you want to say, well, I'd really like to do pediatrics first, or surgery last, or surgery first and pediatrics last, or late, whatever. And then they'll just tell you where you're going, and you'll be assigned. And it's pretty much all, except for family practice, which is, it's a big area of family practice. It's all this one hospital, and you can live across the street if you want to. For the DO schools, you have to find, a lot of times you have to find your own rotations. I mean, they have a list of people that'll take students, but you have to, you go all over, the region, within a couple states to get your core rotations. So, in the PA schools, some of the PA schools, the one my niece is attending, she has to go different places in California for the Jefferson PA school. It's pretty much, most of it's in Virginia, but some of it's in Tennessee and North Carolina. So that's a big deal. That's a big deal, having to scramble for your clinical rotations. And so if you do apply to a DO school, again, if you study hard, you'll be well prepared, but it's going to be more difficult to find the clinical rotations. And then the fourth year is electives, which is kind of the same thing. I mean, so you don't always get your choice of the electives you want to do.
What if, well, this is a completely not on topic, but if you take a gap year between,
Oh, that's great.
this
Most students do, and I don't know the statistics, it's probably on the site. but most do. And I always said when I did the interviews, I could tell us like 30 seconds into the interview, I could tell who took the gap year. And that was to their advantage. Yeah, because I mean, you go and work, right? You like go out in the real world. So I think it's a good thing. I mean, otherwise, you're just a student, you don't get to really experience life. And, if you don't have the M scores that you want, I mean, you could study more and work and do more of like these things. I mean, a lot of people will go do a lot more of these things. Do research. You could get like some sort of year of research. You could really have that to your strong suit and do more volunteering and work on your MCAT. And a lot of people do that. And I think, like I said, I think it's to their advantage, and it's not frowned on at all. The other thing is, if you look, if you look at the students that didn't get accepted the first year and then reapplied the next year, some of my favorite students, like sort of would say on the side, well, I didn't get in the first time, and they like get these crazy, wonderful residencies. And for one of the graduation, I was our graduation speaker, not this last year, but the year before. I was a faculty member, and one of the students who was asked to be the speaker is doing his general surgery at Duke, which is like this really hard residency to get, right? He's a great student, and his speech was about how he didn't get in the first time. And then he got on the wait list at VTC, and of course he got like AOA and whatever, and so, I mean, he did wonderfully, but he talked about how he didn't get in. And there was another woman the year before who got a great residency in orthopedic surgery, and she said, we were talking one day, she said, I always felt like a fraud because I didn't get in the first time. And she was like this great student. So, and they just kind of need to work on these things, So taking a year off is, I think it's good. It's not for everybody. I mean, some people don't want to do that, but.
Prevents it right now. Taking a break from rigorous academia.
Yeah, I mean, it's also getting to know life a little bit too. I mean, you're
Knowing
coming in this role that you're taking care of people, and yet you've only been a student. I mean, you don't know what it's like to have to pay the rent, or coming to work every day and understanding how health can interfere with your work. And, I mean, it's just real world experience. It's good for medicine. In law schools, it's a huge plus. And a lot of law schools don't like taking students right out of undergraduate school. They want them to work. In business for MBAs, it's sort of the same thing too. You're a much better candidate if you've actually worked in the real world. So definitely not a negative.
Do different places put preference on volunteer and like undergrad education between like EMT work and nursing assisting work, or is it viewed as just like working in?
I don't think they would really differentiate. They would probably limit the amount of time that you spend.
And would they count?
I would feel like Carol Gilbert, who was one of the surgeons that was on she was a trauma surgeon, and she lived and breathed the EMTs.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were an EMT, it was like sort of like the admissions dean being an Eagle Scout. I mean, God knows, like Carol Gilbert loved that, and so you might also find somebody who, like a geriatrician, that if you were a nurse's aide in a nursing home, and that might be like huge to them too. So, but I think it's really how many hours you've spent doing it, and the variable experience that you have.
So if someone were to pursue EMT work, would it be better to do it purely in like Sarasota Memorial, or would it
Wouldn't matter.
like fire EMT be the same?
I think the EMT is more medical than the fireman, you know, but, I mean, if you're a fireman, obviously that's another skill set that's very important too. So, you would probably, the fireman, if you're not doing anything medical, is more like the community work and volunteer, and the EMT is community work and volunteering plus it's medical. But they're both of value. They're both of value. So, and different places are, you know, different people value, sort of depends on their background. We'll talk a little bit about distance traveled, and I know that every medical school looks at that. They would actually, on the AAMC site, you would say, you know, you list your siblings, like how many siblings you have, and you list your parents and their level of education and what they do. And so we had something for distance traveled, and it really was more, like the first month I was on there, I thought that distance travel, like, wow, he came from California. That is not what they meant, right? I can't believe I thought that, but actually
Like
did.
first generation
And,
student.
but, I mean, there was one student who had, I remember, I was really passionate about bringing him in because that student had a lower MCAT score. It was back when, like, we had the old MCAT, and he had like a 29, and our cutoff was 30, and they still interviewed him because, like, neither one of his parents had finished high school, right? And he worked. You looked at what he did. Well, he worked all summer long. He couldn't go do research because he was paying for his college. You know, he was putting himself through college. And so that means a lot, you know, and so maybe that person was a little shy on research. Yeah, they were, because they could only do what he did during college because he was working. And so that's important stuff. So it kind of, again, you're more considered as a person. You wouldn't believe the level that they dig down and look once you've interviewed.
With the campus community volunteering, could you possibly include jobs? Because I've had volunteer positions here on campus that have turned into official jobs. Okay, I just didn't know.
Yeah, because they're going to like you if you're supporting yourself.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
So, like, they'll say, yeah, I mean, like, it's all very judgmental, right? But yeah, so that goes with the same thing, not just that you're volunteering, but yes, you have a job and you work.
Okay.
You know, I work because they'll see that you're supporting yourself. That's real. I'm glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, because I haven't had the time to volunteer because I'm working 2 jobs on top of
Right.
school.
But
so.
that would go under the heading of that. And I
Okay.
think that the heading that we had was, like, this is like made up pretty for students, but it would be like employment, volunteering, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
But I would still say, so that would really be a big chunk of that if you had working 2 jobs, but I would still say you should have some experience in medicine.
yeah, definitely. And then priority of volunteering versus shadowing, because I've spent 1 January ISP and a whole various doctors.
They're gonna ask you for the number of hours.
Okay.
They don't care if you're getting paid, or you're volunteering, or you're shadowing. They just want to know that you're there. It's better if you get paid.
Okay.
But and they'll ask for number of hours. And the other thing is, like, almost without exception, you look, it's like, wow, that person had 57-hour days, you know, because how do they do all that stuff? But you actually list the number of hours when you did it. Like, I work, you know, 20 hours a week from January through June, you know.
Okay.
Right, so they're gonna ask you the number of hours, and so they'll see that you work 2 jobs, and so it doesn't matter if you're getting paid, or you're volunteering, or that you're shadowing. It's just that you're there, that you see it. And I think shadowing is probably a richer experience.
Do they ask for a prospective, like, field that they
No.
match?
If they did, nobody would know,
Yeah.
and they would all change.
Like lab pathology versus like emergencies?
No, everybody changes.
Mm.
Yeah.
So, for the benefit of those here and those who might watch the video later, can you talk about the scenario of a student whose MCATs are just barely good enough, right? Or maybe their letters of recommendation are going to be not stellar because they had some blips along the way. So for a student here, without grades, whose materials are going to be less than perfect, what are some strategies for eventually getting into med school?
Well, one of the things is that if you look at grades or evaluations, the schools will say, they had a terrible freshman year, but look what happened to the GPA, obviously they matured, right? And so if it's earlier in, just do better, just do better. And also, don't ask anybody for a letter of recommendation. When you ask them and say, I'm applying to medical school, and I was going to ask if you could write me, if you would feel comfortable writing me a good letter of recommendation. And if they say no, then ask somebody else. So honestly, you want to give them a choice of backing out, and so don't ask anybody who won't give you an excellent letter. And if you've been that kind of a student, well, I would work harder and reform, and then that same person can say, wow, they've really done a lot of growing.
So,
which is fine, because that's what you're supposed to do, Colin.
So for the student who gets to, late in their third year or August in their fourth year, and their MCAT is 499 or something like that, and there's not really a lot of time to make it better, that students ask me, should I take a gap year and take classes? Should I just simply study and get my MCAT better? Should I get a master's degree first? In terms of that piece, are there better strategies for eventually getting into
I think it depends on what the problem is. There are many master's programs that are 1 year, and they're designed to get you into medical school. There's one at Georgetown. There's one at Virginia Tech, and but they're like one at Drexel. We saw, and I know the one at Georgetown. They actually take classes with a medical student. So if you get an A, it's like, well, this person can get an A in a medical school class. So it's expensive. But I think that if you're really repairing a lot of stuff, then that would be a good way to go. Plus, they pave the way for you to get the really hard to get the experience, and they make those experiences happen.
How valid is that MCAT score? Let's say you take it during your junior year and you decide to take a gap year. Would it still be valid for you?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it says on the site it's valid for.
So once you take it, it's valid for.
Yeah, right. If it's good. I don't think it's valid for 5 years.
Yeah.
But, oh yeah, and if you got a good MCAT and you were happy with it, I wouldn't take it again. It can go down, and then we could see that it went down. And we can see them all, but most schools just take the highest one. And law schools, they average them. The LSAT. Yeah, they average them. But yeah, most MCAT. Sometimes they're really 5 times, It's but it's usually not 5 times. But a lot of times it's 3. Yep. C3. So. I think it's all individual, and if you don't like your MCAT score, you don't feel like you're ready, then find something that you want to do and work on whatever you have to work on. If you have a great MCAT score, then take a couple classes and whatever, biochemistry, whatever, and get an A some nice place. Show them that you can do it when you want to. It's sort of, it's very individual.
If you had one piece of advice for yourself while you were an undergraduate student, what do you think you would say?
Well, I wish I was more aware of it. Again, I was not pre-med until the end of my junior year. I didn't even take biology. So,
What was your major?
chemistry and math, but chemistry and math minor. But I was going to be a chemist. I just wasn't very good at it. So I was really lousy at it. I was good at the book stuff, you know,
Mm-hmm.
but I was really lousy in the lab, and I didn't like it, which is why I was lousy. But I sort of had like a epiphany, like, oh gosh, I really hate this stuff. What am I going to do? But I had all the prereqs because I was a chemistry major, right? So I have everything but biology. So I actually took the MCAT without having taken any college biology. But I had a good high school teacher. So, and my scores in chemistry were pretty good. Chemistry and physics were really good because that was my major. But so I squeaked in so I didn't really kind of go through this process. I think that I've said it's not just an application, it's more like of a way of life, because when you get into med school, it's going to be the same thing, because you're going to be looking at residency. And it really is, that's what we do. That's who we are. And if you really want to do it, then you start by being this more holistic person who is serving others early on. And also we're scientists, right? And so I would say do it together. Just think of the things and look for those opportunities. Don't be afraid to turn down opportunities. And also don't be afraid of being rejected, you know? Don't be afraid of taking an opportunity. Because if you don't try, then
Every shot you don't take.
yeah, and it's fun. I wish I hadn't said that stuff about EVA.
We'll edit it out.
Yeah, please edit that out, or at least, I have so many students that went to UVA, so. All right, anything else?
If you identify very heavily with your academia and you have very strong interest within it, how do you state that to the people interviewing you? I feel like personally it would be easy for people looking at my coursework and extracurricular activities to feel like I'm just in my books all the time. And it's a little bit more than that.
Yeah. Well, again, by having more holistic activities besides, nobody's going to penalize you for having good academics. They really won't. And if you are interested in academics, you can be in academic medicine, right? So that's very important. That's the whole research piece. The medical schools like that a lot. So, but they also would like to see somebody who's more holistic too and has outside interests as well, or does other things outside. Have I answered all your questions? Okay. And Michelle has my contact information. A lot of this